Thank you, Ken. Parables have layers. Each one is unique. Each one has powerful images to offer. Each has layers, depths of meaning. Just when you think you figured a parable out, something happens in your own life that changes the way you come at that story. Just when you think you figured a parable out, someone shares an idea with you, shares something from their life experience that turns that parable upside down. Parables have layers. You can't just say, I've heard it once and I'm done. You can't just assume that after a quick reading that what you first think of is where you will be as you study that parable, as you pray over it, as you wrestle with it, as it works on you. As we go through Lent this year, we will be looking at a different parable each week. We'll look at where we see God in the story, where we see ourselves, where we see the community in our world, and what God might be calling us to do in response. How deep each of us goes with this reflection is really up to us. Lent begins as a personal journey, and we'll go through it together with those first steps. How deep to dive, how far to go, how vulnerable we're willing to be on the journey. It's up to each individual. Today's parable is a short version. The different Gospels all tell some of the same stories, and some of them tell them a little different. Today's is a very short version of this familiar image of sheep and shepherds. Sheep and shepherds. If one out of 100 is lost, the shepherd goes to find it. If you find it, you rejoice. It's a very simple, short telling. Sheep and shepherds show up throughout the scriptures. From David as a shepherd boy, Psalm 23 and the imagery of the good shepherd and the sheep. And in today's short version, we get the sheep and the shepherd at a very interesting point. Before this parable, Jesus has just been using children as an example of the kingdom of God. He was just telling people you need to become like one of these children to be part of the kingdom of God. And he has a warning not to make any of these children stumble. Don't lead them to lose faith. Don't lead them into dangerous places. Be responsible for how we care for these children. And then right after the parable, Jesus talks about resolving conflict. He says, if someone has sinned against you within the church community, go and talk to them. Take an elder or two with you. Take a couple of folks you trust with you so there's none of this he said or she said stuff. Everybody's on the same page and try to resolve it. And if that doesn't work, talk to the church about it. Let the church be involved with resolving conflict. Peter follows this up with, okay, and after we've done all that, how many times do we have to keep forgiving them? And Jesus says 70 times 7. Now people can do the math on this and figure it out, but we're talking about symbolic numbers, sacred numbers, the days of creation. The days of creation times 10 times the creation again. Jesus is in Hebrew numerology saying forever. These two stories, interestingly enough, this before and after, can have an impact on how we read the parable. They can have an impact on how we read the parable. So if we look at what comes before, directly before, we're thinking about a child, and specifically a child who's been caused to stumble. If we did cause someone to stumble in their faith, we should go find them. If we did cause someone to be led astray, we should set aside our fear of leaving the comfort of community to go find the one who desperately needs the comfort of the many. Forget our comfort. Go deal with the one whose safety we have put at risk. Go find the one that we have pushed away. Suddenly, by putting it in this context, we are the shepherds. We are the shepherds seeking those who are lost with a humility that we might be the reason they're lost. We're seeking those that the church did not manage to love fully the first time. Those who did not feel a welcome, did not feel included, did not feel claimed as part of the flock, part of the herd. And so we go out in search. How many lost sheep has the church turned out over the years? How many sheep have known pain in the church and decided they are done with God? When my wife was a child, her father was the pastor of the church, and she sat in pews not too differently from these as her father sat behind the communion table. And leaders of the church came to the table and around table in their communion prayer, prayed to God for the power to fire her father. It was at that point that she emotionally left the church. When she was 18, she had her own choices on what to do. She went away to college and away from church. She was one pushed away, caused to stumble by the fighting, by the pettiness, by hatred in the church. By hatred in the church. If the church has caused one of these children, these sheep, to stumble, to go astray, then it is our job as church to go after them. Those who've experienced hurt in these pews, in churches across the country, throughout time, if we have caused pain as church, it is our responsibility to become the shepherds and go search for them. Those who came and because they were not the right color for our church family, because their history was not the same, because their sexual identity did not match the norm, because they were divorced, because they had a different learning ability, because they had a different political persuasion. Those who were turned away from church because of our inability to love, they are our responsibility. If we would cause one of these children to stumble, we become the shepherds. This Lent, who should we be searching for? Who should we be searching for? These before and after pieces can dramatically affect the way we read this parable. Not just the before, but the after. After, we're thinking about those who've hurt us, sinned against us. Specifically, we read that we should confront them with love and with witnesses, because boundaries are a safe thing. Community and sharing together is a good thing. Conflict doesn't have to stay in the shadows. We don't need the he said or she said. We need to talk about church in times of conflict. Peter asks Jesus how many times we forgive. And that comes back to us today. How often has someone in church wronged us and we've just kept our distance? How often in our communities has someone hurt us and so we've written them off? How often have our families fractured, and rather than seeking reconciliation, we just kept the peace by not working for peace? How often have those who could have been part of our flock, part of our community, been separated out by conflict, unresolved, forgiveness, unsought? How many keep running away from love? How many have turned away from community in shame, in greed, or just simply in distrust for how the community did its business? When my wife was 20 years old, she was a psychology student in college. She decided that she would do an internship with a small country church to be their youth leader. She was supposed to look at how psychology and counseling tools worked in communities. She was approaching it in her own mind as an opportunity to figure out what it was about church that made people so mean. Hear that again. She wanted to figure out what it was about church that made people so mean. This little rural church, this little church where everyone was family, knew her family. The board chair had grown up in the same little church her mother had down in Paint Lick, Kentucky. You can't make these names up. Her father had served there briefly as a seminary student. They knew her, and they claimed her. In that small church, one of the lost sheep was found. Healing took place. She was found again, and soon became their pastor, their first female pastor, because they knew her, and she could lead them to a place they'd never been before. She found God's calling again in that place. And 15 years later, the transformation that took place there led her back to Indiana, to the same congregation she'd sat in as a child, the same building where she had experienced hurt, as part of a minister's group talking about transforming congregations. And she didn't just go back as the little hurt girl. She went back as the Reverend Dr. Yates, with a degree in healing traumatized churches. As I've watched her journey, I am reminded of the responsibility the church holds to seek those that we have hurt, to claim them, to continue to offer them a safe place, to pull them back into home with love rather than judgment, a safe place, a true sanctuary, not just a worship meeting space, but a safe place for our hearts and our souls to mend and to find God again. And if they don't feel safe going in, then we are called to be shepherds, to go out, to tend the flock wherever they may be, wherever they have found safety, to carry the message of God's love and affirm that there is a church that loves them wherever they roam. Through my wife's journey, I've been reminded that the gifts of those out there are so needed by us in here. That those that we have lost along the way may be the answer to our future. They may be the ones to lead us to that beloved community. So much we have lost by our infighting, by our unwillingness to forgive, by our unwillingness to do the hard work of reconciliation, to allow transformation to happen within us and within others with whom we have beefed, had quarrel, or disagreed. As we go through this season of Lent, there are those out there, runaways and offenders, who are still the sheep of God's community. It is our job to find them, to forgive them, to love them, and offer them a place to be. This Lent, who should we be looking for? Who should we be looking for? Parables have layers. It's easy to see Jesus as the shepherd. Jesus is the good shepherd. It's easy to see God as searching for us when we are lost, and God does. But parables have layers, many ways to understand one story. And so what if we are also the shepherds? If so, we have a choice to make. We have a choice to make. Will we go searching for what we've lost? Will we go searching for what we feel is missing? Will we go on a journey that requires risk? Will we go on a journey that requires hard work? Or are we just in this faith business for the warm fuzzy of being found ourselves? Are we ready to go on a journey? Are we ready to put in the work? Are we ready for Lent? If so, what will you be looking for? Amen.